In every game of PUBG, the most decisive moment your team experiences is going to be the full-on 4v4 team fights that occur. My name is Jabroni, former coach of Ghost Gaming PUBG, and in this video, we're going to dive into PUBG teamfight mechanics in an effort to take your team to the next level. Now before we begin, I want to give a big shout out to everyone for watching these videos, and everyone who has subscribed along the way. Our channel is booming. Now, teamfights in PUBG are complicated, and I had to debate within myself to make it one long video or split it into shorter, smaller edits. So this video will be part 1 in a 3-part series all about teamfights. There's a lot to go over, so sit back, grab a snack, let's get to work. Before we do any of that though, be sure to subscribe right here and turn on those notifications. According to YouTube, only 5% of you watching these masterclass videos are subs. On top of that, if you have any interest in PUBG streams on Twitch, thanks to COVID-19, I have a little extra time on my hands, so come by and see if you can learn a thing or two interacting live. Now that's enough pleasantries, let's get into it. In order to start out the conversation of teamfights, we need to understand the varying different types of teamfights that we may encounter throughout a game of PUBG. So let's quickly break out a list. To start it off, teamfights can be categorized into one of 3 different sections. Neutral fights, where both teams are on even ground. Offensive fights, where you are aggressing against an opponent. And defensive fights, where your squad is holding a position in an effort to keep another team out. Neutral fights are in most cases spur-of-the-moment surprise engagements, whether it be your team and another pulling up to the same compound, accidentally walking into each other in a hill or dip type area, or even an early game hot drop. These fights can be incredibly difficult to handle. Good communication and fast decision making from an IGL are going to be most important here. Offensive fights are usually fights where your squad is at a huge disadvantage. In most cases, your position is no longer playable, and you will have to aggress onto an opponent through either a crash or push on a defilade position. These fights are normally caused by a circle shift and will frequently be under an extreme time restraint. Defensive fights, however, are quite the opposite. These confrontations occur when your position is under siege in some way by an opponent, whether it be a crash or a push on any power position in the zone. In most instances, your squad will have advantages in these fights. In part 3 of this series, we will try to focus on capitalizing on these moments and not throwing those advantages away. Now that we understand the difference between the types of encounters your squad will experience as they fight for that chicken dinner, I want to take some time to talk about the most pivotal skill your squad mates and you will have to master. That skill is trading. I have spoken about this in other videos, and I will keep speaking about it in the future, as the ability to trade is the most important thing you can learn in PUBG. For those of you who may not know what I mean by trading, it is simply the ability to push an opponent as a group of more than one player, and even if your front man gets knocked, it can instantly be traded back by one of your squad mates. A team that can consistently trade 1-for-1 knocks in every fight and focus on pushing 2v1 or even 3v1 engagements quickly will have great success in PUBG and can instantly be put in the upper percentages of squads in the world. This can be practiced both in squads and duos, and it is pivotal that you and your teammates practice this every chance you get, including public games. Now let's quickly take a look at an example from some of the top teams in EU, Tornado Energy and Natus Vincere, aka Navi. Now Navi is in black, and in this video, Tornado Energy is in yellow. Kemba is in a solo situation in a 2v1. Now the Tornado Energy players are able to realize that they have the advantage here, so they wait for the opportunity and strike. Now it seems pretty straightforward. Push an opponent and kill them. But take a look right here in slow motion at the quick left look to realize his teammate is with him, and they push together. This way, in case Kemba was able to get a single knock on one of the players, they were perfectly in sync and would be able to return the knock, aka the trade. Up next is an example from North America, Wildcard vs Zenith. I want you to focus on the left side of your screen. Roth. He's making a flank play by himself. Now, in some cases, this can be a really good way to get a free knock on an opposing team. However, Wildcard does a fantastic job getting a quick trade and knocking Roth in the process. Unfortunately for him, he was by himself without a teammate. No trade was given back, and therefore it was a 1-for-0 in Wildcard's favor. Now that we got the basics of trading down, I want to get into neutral fights, as that is going to be the focus of the remainder of this video. Now I want to start it off with hot drops, as they're probably the most consistent neutral fight that you're going to run into, especially playing ranked. Now in public games, hot drops are an absolute mess, frequently featuring 4 or more teams dropping in the same city. Although more hectic than a simple 4v4 hot drop, all of these tips ahead will still apply. The key to a hot drop is elevation and information, using a center player with elevation to give your team the information they need. Your job is to isolate and eliminate players one at a time. Hot drops come with a few different methods. Firstly, we'll talk about the RNG drop. This is basically taking the 50-50 and landing on an opposing player, betting on the fact that you will be the first to get a gun. In a competitive environment, it's important to avoid doing this as much as possible. However, there are specific instances where you may need to 50-50 overpower positions. Tall buildings with the ability to access lots of information. While dropping in a hot drop, it's important to try and control center. Hot drops will fail if you and your squad are cornered in one side of a city, so prioritizing the center is vital. This allows your squad to have a wealth of information. By maintaining one player at minimum center, the rest of your team can wrap around the city and clear isolated players to diminish your threats. This is what we call sweeping, which is a very important skill to master in hot drop stalemates. As you're going through a hot drop, relay information to the rest of your team. If you see a player you can target, go after him in a 2v1 or 3v1 situation. By using proper trading here, you can guarantee you will win this fight almost every single time. On top of that, if the other team is pressuring one of your players, be sure to go on the defensive and set up so you punish them during this attempt. In the early game, utility can be absolutely huge. A flashbang, a Molotov, or even a frag grenade can help you clear a specific area, and a smoke grenade thrown right at the edge right in front of a window can stop the opponent from being able to see your push and your rotation, and hold them off from being able to protect their own squad member. In some instances, when a hot drop initial fight has ended, you will find yourself without information on where the remaining opponents are. Do not go on the offensive. The other squad's only play now is to try and rat out in order to get free knocks. There is absolutely no reason to fall into this trap. Retreat towards the edge of the city or compound, remain together and near one another, and loot along the way. After you find a vehicle and begin your rotation, consider yourself the winner of the hot drop. Good job. Your other neutral fights will come accidentally throughout a game, where your squad and opposition accidentally are forced to engage, and your only choice is to react quickly. Now obviously, there are endless variations of fights you may come across, so I will touch on a few of the main ones. First, I want to focus on Sandhawk, the wooded areas on Erangel, the foliage fights. In many cases, your squad is going to be traveling on foot through highly wooded and defilade-filled terrain. In these situations, it is frequently a surprise team fight that you run into. Now, before we even take a second to talk about how to react to these engagements, we should first talk about preparation. The most important part about being prepared for a team fight is the position your team defaults into. Basically, the distance between one another while moving from point A to point B. Although some teams play more spread than others, I recommend moving in somewhat of a diamond shape, giving each teammate a direction to focus. If your team can maintain a distance of about 50 meters or less to one another, you will be ready to strike when a surprise team fight comes out of nowhere. One of the reasons that you travel with a spread in this type of terrain is so you can get extra angles if a fight does appear. Now, if we take a look at this example, I'm basically just using one tree as cover. This will block one direction, as here I can defend myself from the north. But if there is an opposing player slightly west or east, I'm completely open to those shots. This is why we use our spread. As soon as we enter a fight in this type of terrain, we want to spread and get our angles right away. This way, we can start putting out damage and hold this team back. Similar to rotating in vehicles, on foot you need to make sure that you are rotating with the correct pathing. While moving through wooded areas, try and maintain a position close to cover, whether it be a tree, a rock, or a piece of defilade. It's important that you maintain cover so when shots ring out, you can quickly get to it and start returning fire, giving you the ability to respond to pressure with pressure yourself. Now that's going to bring us to our reaction to a surprise fight in this type of terrain. If your team doesn't suffer any knocks, the first thing you want to do is start applying pressure to the opposing team, which makes the best thing for you to do to turn and start shooting. If you're out of line of sight, this is a great opportunity to go get an angle, whether that be running to the east, the west, the right, the left, whatever direction you need to move to try and get a position that will help win this fight for your team. On top of that, if you're not quite in the fight and it's not right in front of you, this is a great time to use some utility. Throwing out some nades in front of your opponent will force them to step back, giving the rest of your team an opportunity to respond. Similar to every other fight though, at the end it comes down to angles and trading. If you can get the information on where the other team is, get the angles to get the kills. If you can't do that, isolate one player and push them in a group of 2 or 3 to quickly turn the fight in your favor. Now that's going to bring us to the final part of this video, and that is neutral fights within compounds. Now throughout a game of PUBG, especially on Erangel and Miramar, you're going to find yourself time and time again fighting opponents inside hard cover, whether it be being in the same compound, crashing, having a team crash on you, or even just being so unlucky that you pull up to the same compound at the same time. You need to get used to fighting in compounds and how to make it work for you. Now, I will go over this in offensive and defensive fights because there's a lot of different ways to go about it. So let's assume right now that two teams are basically heading into the same exact compound. How do we handle this? Well, first off, to be frank, compounds offer something that the hill, defilade, and wooded areas don't offer, and that's hard cover. Whether it be a building, a wall, or anything that you can sit behind that keeps you protected from multiple directions. So when you're fighting for a compound, obviously, you want to be in that hard cover rather than outside. And that is why one of the most important things when fighting in a compound or fighting in buildings or in a city or anything like that is you need to move quickly. Hesitation will get you killed. The other team will take the hard cover from you, will take the better buildings, and they will be able to hold you out in a very, very safe way.
He just has to hunker down. Finally stepping around the corner. Gonna take a couple of shots. That's gonna be quick pickup and flush. But now he knows it's gonna be a ton of people coming after him. Quick do-si-do around the outside. That's gonna go ahead and try to get a little bit more meds, a little bit more time. Know somebody's gonna be coming around back from the point he was just playing at. It's gonna be points on 2 different aggression. Doesn't have anywhere he can go. Quick pincer gonna go ahead and be good plays coming up from 64 up. But guess who hears this? It's gonna be Clueless. They might opt into making a play because they are just
So this past weekend, a perfect fight arose between Snow Patrol and Wildcard in the NA PCS. And this is a perfect example of a neutral fight in a compound where one team does well and another team makes mistakes. Let's break it down. As our fight begins, Snow Patrol pulls up on the compound and is immediately welcomed with a great grenade throw from Pentalol of Wildcard. Now very quickly, I want to take note of the positions of all the players currently involved in the fight. All 4 members of Snow Patrol have now entered the compound. There's one wildcard player right there at the bottom left of your screen who threw the grenade, and another one on the top of your screen that is holding down the shacks. Now this is a perfect time for Snow Patrol to try and gain some ground, try and get some information, and look to return damage. Now, when you're in a fight within a compound, it's very important to try and gain ground as quickly as possible. The more buildings you clear, the more space you create for yourself, the easier this fight is going to be. Snow Patrol makes a huge error. They push inside one building in order to try and clear it. On top of that, they have another player going for a res. All 4 Snow Patrol players are within 10 meters of one another. This is when Wildcard is able to get a lot of control over the compound.
On Snow Patrol right now, as you can see, Jazza just holding down the shack. The Molotov's going to come in, but it's going to be a little bit late. Hershey,
Oh, Jazza.
Jazza with a 2-piece.
Now at this point, as soon as Jazza gets these 2 knocks, the fight is basically over. As the rest of Wildcard pulls up, they have a great spread throughout the compound, and they have a 4v2 with 2 players locked in one individual building. But we need to figure out how we got here, and we need to try and understand why Wildcard in a 2v4 was able to overcome those odds and turn this fight in their favor. And that brings us back to a screenshot from a few seconds ago. The position of Snow Patrol all on one building. Now, unfortunately for Snow Patrol, they did have one player get knocked from a Grey Grenade, and that's props to Wildcard. That is not their fault, that's just something that happens. So unfortunately, they are instantly down 2 players because they need to get that res. The mistake comes from the other 2 players, stacking onto the same building. Snow Patrol did have some control on the shacks on the bottom of your screen, but they also had an opportunity to push towards Pentalol, or even push towards Jazza. They could have looked to get more ground. This way, they would have had extra buildings, extra angles, and they would have been able to take this fight a lot cleaner. And that is the focus of this fight, and that is why they lose.
Bad. Now it's just sneak attack and crawfish. They're hiding in the top of this compound. This compound, though, pretty difficult to push. But Wildcard, they've got support now. All 4 members here. And Snow Patrol, we may have cast or cursed you.
Yeah,
That was a nice name on Keenan. Yeah, this is going to be a tough push. But now the Wildcard's got all 4 here. Unless they just absolutely throw this thing over the mountain like Uncle Rico, they should have this. Crawford's going to find one, but immediately get traded out by Keenan. Sneak attack. See if he can maybe pull off something. Nope. That's going to be it. That is not what Snow Patrol needed.
Guys, that's going to do it for part 1 of Teamfights. We have a lot more to go over in parts 2 and 3, and we're going to focus on both offensive and defensive fights. So I'm going to have a ton of great tips and tricks and all of that to help get your team in the best shape they can possibly be. I hope you guys enjoyed part 1. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.